Welcome to this Considered Opinions podcast.
I'm Dougal.
And I'm Celia. Thank you for joining us. Hello 2025.
Yes, brand new year.
Our first podcast this year, we thought we would discuss moving forward. The new year is usually a time of making New Year's resolutions and plans and looking ahead. And so we thought a good way to start the year would be to look at moving forward, creating a future of hope.
And I think part of that making plans for the future is also going over what has been. And I think this is a good place to start because I look around and I see a lot of good news out there at the moment. There's changes happening very rapidly in the US. We've had an election there. Trump's back in and he's certainly shaking things up. But I also see elections ahead in this year. Canada's looking at having elections and it's not looking good for the establishment. It's looking good for Pierre Poilievre. Things are looking good for the Liberals in Australia, not looking good for Labour there. And in the UK, well, they had elections last year, but oh my, haven't the wheels fallen off Labour in the UK? Things are not looking good for them. It is looking good for the new kids on the block. Reform ahead in the polls. I mean, who would have thought that even just a year ago? So things are changing fast. There's a lot of new good friends. Mark Zuckerberg has gone from denying that there was ever any censorship
to promising no censorship.
Yeah. So things are changing and they're changing fast. In a way, one of the backhanded good news stories is Fauci getting a pardon from Biden. Now, that's as close as I think we're ever going to get as an admission of guilt.
I think that's right. And I think that is one of the ways in which we need to start viewing the happenings of the world, is that sometimes it's not so much what is said outright, it's what is implied by certain behaviours. And I think that there's a lot of times when there's not going to be apologies necessarily or admission of guilt, but simply by observing the panic that certain parties might have or pardons that are granted in advance.
Yes.
You can see they know and we know. And now we know that they know. And they know that we know that they know.
Absolutely. And I guess for me, this is the basis of building a hopeful future, is looking at these good things which are happening, these good changes, and holding them to heart. Now, these are big picture things, but have a look around where you are and there may be local things for yourselves where you see things are changing and improving. We're certainly seeing it amongst friends and families. There are certain people who have sort of changed their tune on certain subjects, and also, we're seeing a lot of new friends cropping up still. Even now, there's lots of people sort of turning up that you wouldn't have necessarily expected to be on our side of the argument at this stage.
The thing is with looking forward with hope is that we need to take that time, and what you're talking about there is an attitude change. You're talking about taking the time to look around you and notice the good things. And I think that that's the first most important step in building that hopeful future, is making sure that we notice the positives, the small positives around us. We notice the good things that are happening. And I think the other thing is really taking control ourselves, our responsibility ourselves, and that we're not waiting for somebody to apologize, or we're not waiting for something to go completely our way. We're actually building on our own attitudes and our own outlook. And we know in ourselves then that we have nothing to prove. We can be sure of what we believe and move forward with confidence.
I certainly think that history's on our side, and any sort of interactions we have with people, we don't need to be apologetic. We don't need to get het up even. We just need to simply be confident
Well, we have nothing to prove.
Yeah, and at the moment they have everything to defend, because things are really looking not so good for establishment types.
That plays into the emotional and mental independence from the establishment that is so important, and that we have talked about previously, and that as being the best way towards resilience, is that if we are not relying on them, waiting for the next thing that they're going to drop on us, or the next problem that's going to be solved by an external third party higher up, if we are changing that attitude within ourselves, and it's a process, it happens. I mean, it's hard to unlearn habits of an entire lifetime that are ingrained in us because of our culture. But if we start to, as we're working on that and becoming more independent from the establishment system, then that gives us more freedom, and it also makes us more hopeful for the future, because we're not living in fear of what the next thing that they're going to try and do to us, because we don't rely on them so much.
And usually, I mean, we're in the southern hemisphere here, so we've just gone through summer, or coming through summer, and everyone has their holiday time. And during the sort of summer holiday period, you don't really require anyone else's input to the things you're doing. It's a good time to think about what's been happening over the last month or so, and what was good about it, because chances are, if you're anything like us, you didn't require any external government or anything to help you, when you were down at the beach, or whether you were out in the forest or up a mountain or wherever it was, you were pretty self-sufficient. We were all pretty self-sufficient.
So moving on is something that is going to allow us to look forward with hope. It's going to let us off the hook of having to keep looking at and rehashing, which brings us...
reliving the same pains. We don't want to encourage those wounds. We want those wounds to heal and to eventually be gone.
That brings us to the interesting concept of forgiveness. And I think that that's a tricky thing, because a lot of people...
It's hard. It's very hard.
Well, it is hard depending on how you view it, your
True.
view of forgiveness. Because if you think forgiveness is sweeping it all under the carpet and saying that it doesn't matter anymore, it was all fine, then yes, it's going to be almost impossible.
And that's how I viewed forgiveness for many years. It took me a very long time to realise that that's not what it's about. It's not about forgetting. It's not about pretending like it never happened.
Or pretending that it was all right. And I think that's the important thing, is that forgiveness doesn't mean that you're saying that what happened was all right. Forgiveness is about saying, I want to move forward now.
Yes.
It's about us.
And it lets us off the hook, because we then don't have to internalise all of that anger and pain. It's much healthier if we are able to let that go. And I think also there's an element that we've perhaps forgotten about forgiveness, is that forgiveness is built upon an assumption. And this is where the heritage of the West plays into things, because there is an inherent assumption that we're not perfect in the concept of forgiveness. That as we extend grace to others, we are in effect...
We're also hoping for
We're
grace.
hoping for grace to be extended to us.
Yes.
And now that may not be around certain issues where one may think or know to be in the correct, but there may be a completely different area where
we weren't,
where we haven't been, where we struggle.
Yes. And I think that's a good way to look at it, is that it's always, people always want justice for thee and mercy for me.
Yes.
And this forgiveness actually turns that on its head, in that we all need grace and mercy and forgiveness.
At different times and in different places, we all need it.
We're going to need it. And what we can do is we can start off by saying, look, I'm going to move forward. And I think it's about accepting that we can't actually control other people. We can choose to forgive, in that we can choose to move forward. We can choose to not keep picking at it and going over it and over and over it, because essentially then we are prisoner of that hurt. And so forgiveness there's this whole phrase, forgiveness is about letting someone off the hook and finding out it was you.
Yeah.
And so it's not saying that what happened was okay. It's not saying that what happened didn't matter. It's saying that we each individually are going to choose to move forward into the future and not stagnate.
Yeah. No, I like it. And I think there's sort of other aspects which play into this, and it's associated with recognizing that none of us are perfect. It helps to keep us humble as well. And, a couple of positives about this is that a humble person is going to be a lot more approachable from the perspective of others, and letting go of hurts and being able to perhaps embrace a bit more joy will also be attractive. And I think by and large, the society at large is sick and tired of all of the fear and the bad news and the negativity, and people are actually crying out for a bit of joy in their lives.
Yes, absolutely. We want to know, and the thing is, we can choose then to look around us for the good. We've talked already about the good. There's a lot of big things that are positives that are happening on the world stage.
Yep.
But also we can look for the positives, the day-to-day, the small things. And it can get really what you might call specific. But I think that looking for that positive in the small things will actually, it pays forward. Whatever we focus on grows.
It pays dividends. So for me, I like it just to enjoy the birds. We get a lot of birds around where we are. So enjoy the birds. Maybe for listeners, it might be walking on a beach. Maybe it be going to the park or meeting up with friends for coffee. It may be just the smell of coffee. There'll be those small things. They
add up.
They add up. And that's, I guess, in a way, is also an encouragement for everyone to remember to build small bits of beauty into their lives as well.
Yes. So looking forward with hope plays into the New Year's resolution about how we are going to choose to approach the coming year. Yes. And how we're going to make plans for the future. Because I think also like I said, what you focus on grows. And I think that when we have to think about the sort of future that we want to build, the future that we want to live in. And in order to create that, we have to start living that.
Yes.
And so we think about what we believe, and then we change our behavior, and that will create that future that we want to see. And so really thinking about hopeful things this year, about the future that we want, and starting to implement it in our day-to-day ourselves.
So what does that practically look like? What can we do? I mean, one of the big things over the last few years has been this overbearing top-down approach, overly centralised, overly bureaucratic approach to the way we govern our societies. So maybe one of the things is how we can think about how we can take back control of our lives. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can just be inch by inch.
I think it starts with how you're thinking about it as well, because if you are thinking, it's my responsibility. My life is my responsibility. And I've got to facilitate the things that I need.
Yes.
And that's not talking about being self-sufficient so you can't ever buy anything, or you can't, you have to do everything all yourself. It's about being responsible for each aspect of your life. Then you're going to start to be able to look for the positives around you that this year will bring us.
So, I mean, examples could be, rather than looking at things in your local community and saying, oh, someone should do something about that, it's asking questions, well, what can I do about that? So are we in contact with our neighbours? Maybe that's something that we can do. Are there family relationships that have been on ice for a while and we can try and rebuild those? So take responsibility instead of externalising and saying, oh, well, it's so-and-so did this, such and such did that. We're looking and say, hey, look, how do we want to run our families? How do we want to run our local communities? We'll have local body elections coming up in different places. Well, maybe not in some places in the UK, but maybe that's a chance to get involved and actually take some responsibility. Or maybe it's as simple as re-engaging with friends and family.
Yes. And there's so much potential for good this coming year.
It's a chance to reassess priorities as well.
Yes.
So, yes, we want to take responsibility for our own lives, but we also want to reassess what our priorities are. Are we chasing after things that...
because we actually want them and value them, or because that's what our society says is good?
Yes. So our society loves to tell us, work like a hamster and chase the money. I mean, one of the wisest things I ever had a university lecturer say was, even if you win the rat race, you're still a rat. So do you really want to be a rat and run in the rat race, or are you wanting to build or focus more on what brings joy to your life?
It's just reminded me of a scene from, what's that film, Passengers, where they're on their way to some far distant planet and they're all cryogenically frozen, but two of them
wake up early. Yeah.
And they create this world. It's the final scene where they've created, spoiler alert, they've created, because they had to be on the ship just them for 70 years, they've created beauty. They've created this wonderful environment for themselves to live in. And I think that is just reminding me of the creativity and the potential and the goodness that we can bring and create for ourselves.
Well, what that leads me on to another point, which is part of the materialistic worldview is chasing after wealth. But let's question, what is wealth? You take that situation, you're stuck on a spaceship, or a similar sort of analogy that you often hear people use is stuck on a desert island. They're actually quite similar. But let's stick with the spaceship. If you're stuck on a spaceship with 5 coconuts and $10, or 5 ship's biscuits and $10, are you more or less wealthy than if you're stuck on a spaceship with 5 ship's biscuits and $20? You have actually no more wealth. Just because you have a few more dollars and cents, that's actually meaningless. It's that which adds to your life. And there are some things that dollars and cents simply don't count either. So how much is a friendship worth? How much is family worth?
I think also the people, sometimes you think about what you get to the end of your life and think, oh, I wish I had done 30 countries by 30.
Yes.
Nobody thinks that. It's the case of I wish I'd spent more time with my loved ones, or, nobody thinks, oh, I wish I'd driven a fancier car.
Yes.
Our culture has become very materialistic, and the value system that it's put in place has said to us that only material things have value or create wealth. And when we are opting out of that mental framework, we can then actually think, what is it that is going to create a sense of purpose and value for us that we had filled up that hole with material goods previously?
One sort of counterpoint to this is, I don't think we're saying to go in the opposite extreme either. There are, material things that can help us and be useful. So in that respect, you're treating things like money or whatever assets as you have at hand as available
as a
resource to bring about that which will bring you joy, or that which will bring you fulfillment, or will build the type of life you want. But it's simply recognizing that is only material, and it's not really that which is going to bring you deep and sustained joy and meaningfulness in your life.
So there's a lot of good things that are going on at the moment this year.
A lot of good things.
And I'm feeling very hopeful for 2025. I'm pretty excited to see what it's going to bring.
Thank you for joining us for this Considered Opinions podcast. We look forward to seeing you again next time, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.